All right, folks, welcome to another webinar. I'm glad to be here. I had no idea that we changed the intro music. That's actually delightful. It's much more calming than the last ones that we had. We're here to tackle another important topic tonight. We're talking all about methylation. It's everybody's favorite topic now, right? It's in a lot of the health circles. People are talking about it. In particularly, the MTHFR gene, I would say, is the one that people tend to kind of highlight most. And we're going to dive into that tonight as far as why that may not be the only thing to consider when it comes to this methylation cycle. I must say that people like to really simplify things, and most biological processes in the body are actually pretty complicated step-by-step cellular cascades. Like, for example, the fight or flight response is a good one. Like, it's not as simple as a 1-2, like you feel stress and then the adrenals just squirt out some cortisol and then there you go. There's multiple stages involving, different enzymes and cofactors and things that ultimately lead to cortisol secretion. But it's not as simple as just a 1-2 thing. And I think methylation is a real textbook example of a cellular cascade. There's a lot of different moving parts to it beyond just MTHFR and what that one step is kind of looking like. We'll try to use some analogies tonight because it's a pretty complicated process. And one that I like for this is methylation is kind of like light switches in a building, right? So if you've got a big building and the building represents your body, and then we have all these different rooms, and some of them need to be lit up and some of them can stay dark and some of them can just kind of be dim. And your genes are like light bulbs in that house. Your epigenetics would be the wiring and the switches that control which lights are on and which ones are off. Methyl groups are going to be the finger kind of flipping the switches on and off. So it's controlling which genes are being methylated, aka silenced or not. And if you have too many methyl groups or too few methyl groups, that's going to make it so that the lights are kind of flickering or they're burning too bright or just staying dark. So we're going to get into that because there's a lot of different genetic influence in this. And then there's our lifestyle behaviors and things that also can influence how your genes are actually expressing themselves. So thankfully, I have a coworker here tonight to help me dive into this tough topic. It is the great and powerful Dr. Tracy Steady Hardcastle. Welcome.
Thank you, Justin. I'm so happy to be here for this exciting and fun topic. And when you and I were talking ahead of the webinar, I was telling you how lately, and I'm not even spending that much time on Instagram, but all I seem to be getting is ads for different supplements that have methylated vitamins in them, and they seem to be really targeted toward parents. So one of them is like, is your child exhibiting this and this and this and this, or is your teen? And it'll show a picture of a teen like this. And then after they take this supplement, they're like, I want to help with chores, you know, uh, and it kind of freaks me out because I know this information that we're going to present. And so when I see these ads, I think these parents don't know. And of course, they want their child to be as happy and healthy as they can be. But what they don't know is that they could be doing them a disservice by purchasing this supplement. So I just wanted to put that out there that I'm very passionate about this particular topic, especially because of how it's being advertised right now.
Yeah, and hence the oversimplification, right? It's like I think that the industry is wanting to sort of highlight MTHFR and basically say, like, if you've got suboptimal mutations there, that you're going to need the support of extra methyl groups. And the issue with that is that there's more than one gene of relevance here. And you can have one gene that is faster and one gene that is slower in the cascade. And if we were to blanketly start donating methyl groups willy-nilly, we need to remember that they're highly reactive groups. These things can cause what's called overmethylation pretty quickly. So let's say the MTHFR is suboptimal, but you've got a different variant in your COMT gene that would suggest you shouldn't be adding methyl groups willy-nilly. Then okay, we're now supporting one gene, but we're causing a step backwards with another gene. And a lot of people can end up overmethylating there. And it sort of overloads the cytoplasm, and you end up with like things like anxiety, typical stuff when it comes to overmethylating. So we're going to get to the poll in a second, but I think it's in our interest for me to just kind of briefly run down what our cascade kind of is as far as like the step-by-step process of this. And it's important to remember as well that this is a cycle, right? So this is not something that is just you need to support one area and then let the rest of it kind of go, because we want to make sure that we're keeping with our analogy here. This is a relay race. right? So the genes in the analogy are runners, and then the baton being passed back and forth is the methyl group or the substrate. Each runner is taking the substrate, changing it around and passing it along to the next runner. And then ultimately what you end up with is an availability of things like methionine so that the body can use methylation to do its job. Methylation is super important for regulating all gene expression. So this is going to have impact with neurotransmitters, hormones, your ability to detoxify, because it even impacts glutathione processes. So there's a lot of things that this can be implicit with. And I'm just going to quickly run down what the actual cycle looks like. We've done a lot of webinars about methylation, so I encourage you to go back and look at those as well if you want the deepest dive possible. So here we go. So in the methylation relay race, what happens is folate, which is B9, it enters the cell and it becomes THF, tetrahydrofolate. Then it becomes 5,10 methylene THF by a gene called SHMT1. So that's the responsibility of that first runner. Then MTHFR takes over. And this is why MTHFR is not the only thing of relevance here, because it's a step in this particular race. So MTHFR will convert that 5,10 MTHF into 5-MTHF. That would be the primary methyl donor here. So MTHFR is creating a methyl donor. Okay. There's another movie here that's very important because B12 is going to matter later in the cascade. And we are the only company that I've seen that tests a gene called FUT2. Now, B12 is unique in that it is the only micronutrient that doesn't get passively absorbed in the gut. It requires a transporter to get it through the lumen cells of the gut and distribute it throughout the cells of the body. So that transporter or that taxi cab is called FUT2. We look at that gene to understand, okay, is this person going to absorb the B12 necessary for the methylation cycle in the first place? So FUT2 matters. So then the next runner is called MTRR. And that basically transfers the methyl group from 5-MTHF into the B12, the cobalamin, and it creates methyl B12. Then the next runner is called MTR, that's methionine synthase, and it uses the methyl B12 to convert homocysteine into methionine, and methionine supports numerous functions in the body, including the production of SAMe, which is a universal methyl donor. So just with what I just said, you can see that there's a lot going on. It's a step-by-step process. One of these genes can be doing its job better than another one. And this is what guides our interventions as far as, do we use methyl groups for things like cobalamin, things like folate, or do we not? You might need a methylated form of folate, but not a methylated form of cobalamin, B12. We can't just recommend blanketly that you take B complexes that are all methylated based on everything I just said. Some areas in the cascade may need some support and some may not. So that's what we're looking at. I went over that extremely quickly because we've already done this in other webinars, and I just wanted to reiterate to help kind of preface the rest of this conversation. And without further ado, if you're ready to tackle the poll, I am as well.
Let's do it.
If the angels in the back would mind pulling that up for us. There it is. Lovely. Okay. So we asked you guys a handful of questions here. The first one is, when you heard the word methylation, or when you hear the word methylation, what comes to mind first? And about 50% of you said detoxification. Only about 3% said mental health and mood. 13% said energy and fatigue. 12% longevity and aging. And 22%, in all honesty, saying I'm not sure. So that's very interesting because methylation, as I mentioned, is really implicit in all of our gene expression, right? So really there's no element here that it doesn't have a role in, and getting it right is going to really have trickle-down effect into your whole body and how it all works. The second question that we asked is, have you ever been tested for MTHFR or other methylation-related genes? And fantastic, 63% of you said yes through the DNA 360 or clinical testing. 14% said yes through consumer alternative testing. 9% no, but you've considered it. And 15% not at all. So welcome, and we may be able to change your mind after this because it is a very important thing to look at. Question number 3 is, how much influence do you think lifestyle has on methylation compared to genetics? Right. So this question is about genes versus actual epigenetic input. And pretty low 5% said lifestyle has little influence and that genes dominate. We'll dive into a bit of how that all goes. 9% said lifestyle has some influence. 26% lifestyle and genetics are equally influential. And 40% said lifestyle has a strong influence, and 19% not sure. Fair enough. Couple more that we asked here. The fourth question is, do you believe taking methylated B vitamins are necessary for most people with MTHFR variants? And 18% said yes, always. A whopping 48% said sometimes, depending on the context. I love that. 4% said rarely, only in specific cases, and 29% said not sure. So the last question that we asked is, what would you most like to gain from this session? Most of you want to understand how MTHFR and methylation can be better. So 57% of you said that. 18% said to learn how methylation affects aging as well as longevity. Another 18% said to explore safe supplementation strategies. I love that. I love where your head is at. And 7% said to discover how genetic and epigenetic testing can guide personalized health. We are going to get into that because we offer something called DNA-aging, which is a fascinating test. And 1% said others. So please, by all means, add that to the chat if there's something else you were aiming for this webinar. Whew. All right. We got a lot to unpack tonight, Dr. Steady. What do you think about moving forward with this conversation?
Well, should we just talk about what a methyl group is, just briefly? I know we don't want to get into the weeds in terms of biochemistry, which was one of my most favorite and least favorite classes at the same time. I have to admit that. So it's carbon and hydrogens, and what it can help do is it gets transferred in between things, sort of like that baton, the relay stick that Justin was talking about. And so sometimes people don't know exactly what it means to methylate or not methylate, and it means to add that group or pass on that group to between molecules. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and it's important to note too that when we say methylation as well, when you're methylating something, you're actually turning its expression off, right? So when a donor donates a methyl group, the thing that receives it is now methylated, and the thing that donated it is now demethylated, right? So it's this passing on of these different substrates. And methylation is going on, by the way, thousands of times per second. Like, this is a really quick cycle that's just ongoing and ongoing. And your body will sort of take cues from the environment. So that can be like stress and toxins, light stimulus, heat stimulus, cold stimulus. It takes all of this information and it gathers it. That information will enter the epigenome. And then through the process of methylation, your body decides what to turn on, aka remain unmethylated, and what to silence. Methylation is not good or bad. It's actually the epigenetic profile of each cell that gives it its identity, right? So to preface this a little bit further, every cell in the body has the same DNA, right? It's got the full genome in each and every one of these cells, but the epigenetic regulation channels going on are what make your liver act like a liver and your neurons act like neurons. So epigenetics and methylation, we're almost talking about two different things. When we say the methylation cycle, we're talking about what I just said with the relay race and the different genes that we're talking about there. That's the methylation cycle. And we look at that genetically to see how efficient that cycle is. We don't want genes being willy-nilly turned on, nor do we want them willy-nilly turned off. So that's why we don't want to over or under methylate. That's where we're really careful with our recommendations about B vitamins. So we've got this cycle, it's going around and around. The body is methylating things based on the input that you give it. And then it's up to us to give it the best quality input possible based on the rest of our genetic profile, right? So before our webinar today, we were talking about the diet and nutrition section in the DNA 360. The reason why each and every one of these genes matters is because these influence what our epigenetic decisions are every day. If we give our body the nutrition that is going to metabolize the best, that represents an epigenetic input, and it's going to manifest as our body methylating something properly, not over, not under, proper methylation. So every choice that you make, every thought that you think, it actually will influence how your body is methylating and turning genes on or silencing them. So I love that part of the conversation because it's very much empowering, and we need to make sure that we're giving our body the best possible epigenetic inputs so that your body knows what light switches do I turn on and which one do I turn off.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think people wonder about or hear a lot about is what the symptoms can be of something going wrong in the methylation pathway. Should we talk a little bit about that and then talk about some, so that's, those are some of the things that are accurate, and then there are some things that are more kind of hype or oversimplified. And so maybe if we compare and contrast things that people, that could be a methylation problem that lead to symptoms versus um, this may or may not be true about the methylation pathway. Does that seem like a good next step, Justin?
Absolutely.
So when things aren't going right in the methylation cycle, it can lead to some mood dysregulation, like depression, anxiety, but overmethylation can also lead to jitteriness and anxiety too. So many times in the body, too much of something or too little of something can create the same symptom. And so this is where consulting with someone to help you tease apart the nuances of what you're going through can be really helpful. It helps with histamine clearance or not being able to tolerate histamine. So this is where you might see people. I actually have a family member who, when they exercise, they break out in hives because they just have this crazy histamine response. And I'm not saying it's from methylation, just giving you an example of what can happen. It can contribute to cancer risk, hormone imbalance, infertility, chronic fatigue, all kinds of things like this. That said, it's not going to necessarily fix all of these things. And in some cases, overmethylating could make these things worse. So we've started there, and now maybe we can get into some of the things that are beliefs about using methylated vitamins that may not be true.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of methylation and methylated B vitamins and how they can be overdone. So I'm just going to use a quick personal analogy here. So my sister actually, she at one point was dealing with a lot of fatigue and just energy issues and things like that, and so she was put on like a big dose of B vitamins, and most of them were actually methylated, and it was like a methylated complex and then extra niacin and different things. So, I mean, she was really dosing herself up. Come to look at her genes, and she's really already kind of over methylating there. And it was just absolutely not the right call. She was taking this B complex for a couple of weeks, and it actually gave her panic attacks to the point where she ended up hospitalized because she was just over methylating. That's what we see pretty often is like panic issues, anxiety issues, that kind of thing. It's really common when it comes to over methylating. When someone's under methylating, we see exactly the opposite, right? We see things like malaise and fatigue. There's other things that, as far as the immune system, your body's ability to deal with inflammation, that tends to be suppressed in under methylators as well. So it's kind of a balancing act. And it's a little bit more dynamic than we want to think as well. Like the genes are actually static, but how your body is actually interpreting epigenetic inputs, that's the dynamic environment of methylation. And it's something that you want to make sure that you're supporting with all the different tools that we have, right? So a good example would be like you can use labs to keep an eye on things like homocysteine, right? So what I mentioned earlier in the call is that, homocysteine gets converted to methionine within this whole cycle. And concentrated levels of homocysteine in the body can be highly inflammatory, right? So it's actually an amino acid. It's useful in the body, but when it's elevated, it causes inflammation, particularly in the vascular tissues. So that's why homocysteine is implicated when it comes to like cardiovascular problems and things. And you want a bit of a balance between homocysteine and methionine. When this cycle is off, we find that homocysteine has a tendency to elevate, and it can cause a lot of different cardiovascular issues with people. So as far as a lab, I would say, yeah, keeping an eye on your homocysteine levels is a good place to start. It's a good indicator that your methylation is not going well if homocysteine is regularly being elevated in the body.
And there are two different MTHFR variants, and one of them is much more associated. Both of them are associated to some degree with higher homocysteine, but the C677T allele is the one that's more associated with that, as opposed to the A1298C. That one tends to be associated with certain kinds of medication toxicities and some more psychiatric and neurological conditions. So just knowing that even if you have your MTHFR tested, that there are different MTHFRs even on our test, and they may not have the same effects in the body.
Yeah, and that this is why we get so granular with some of our recommendations as well. And there's a few different things that we take into consideration as well when it comes to the addition or subtraction of these methyl groups. So, like for example, okay, if we're only going to look at MTHFR and base our methyl group additions on that, we're reducing our actual efficacy here, because we also need to think about things like COMT. I know you're a big fan of COMT and what it does. It's a really interesting enzyme. And if your COMT is slow, like, you need to be pretty cautious about adding in lots of B vitamins and SAMe and things like that, because it can lead to methyl group overload pretty quickly. Right. So we get pretty granular as far as like measuring the different genes and what's the most appropriate way to do it, instead of just saying, okay, take this B complex. Same with things like SHMT1, right? If you have variants in the SHMT1 gene, you may require a folinic acid instead of a methylfolate. Methylfolate will overload the cytoplasm in that case, and you'll end up overmethylating there as well. Or, in your methylation profile, you'll see a gene called MTR that I mentioned. Certain variants of that would mean that your body's going to do a lot better on an adenosyl B12 than with like a methylated B12, methylcobalamin. We look at those two things. So we look at MTR to determine what type and whether or not you should have the methyl group. And then we also have to bounce it off of that FUT2 gene as well to see what the format is, because a lot of people with suboptimal FUT2, you're not going to absorb a typical tablet of B12, right? So you need to make sure that if that's suboptimal, you're going to use like a sublingual format, or even you could go intravenous. It's just that, it's a bit of a pain having to go that far out of your way every time you want to take it. But this is how we sort of map it out. It's like, what does that gene cascade look like? How do we support it with the proper B vitamins? And it's mainly folate and B12 that we're looking at. Those are the two primary movers here. I think that a lot of the rest of the B vitamins, I mean, you can accomplish it with leafy greens and with, you can use organ meats and nutritional yeast and stuff like that to kind of fill in the gaps. But those two, you want to get right. You want to get your B9 folate correct, and you want to get your cobalamin B12 correct as well. That's how you're going to really fill in the gaps and get the most efficient cycle that is not going to over or under methylate. You're going to be right in the middle there. And to me, that's just another form of homeostasis, like we talk about with absolutely everything.
And for people who are vegan, many of them really rely on supplements for some of these B vitamins. And so if you end up taking the wrong one, I don't want to say that, it's going to be a total disaster, but you may feel the effects of that in different ways than someone who is also, eating other foods that contain these vitamins. But then if your FUT2 means that you can't really absorb it in the gut anyway, then no matter whether you're vegan or not, you're going to want to end up using the lozenges, like Justin was saying, or perhaps doing the injection or IV.
Yeah. And so that's another good marker, by the way, to keep your eyes on, like keeping your eyes on like serum B12 levels. You may want to have a look at that as far as your lab work is concerned, just to make sure that you're adequate there, because if you're not transporting it properly, you may end up low there. And if you don't have enough B12, I'm telling you, this is really, really important for that MTR, the methionine synthase part in this relay race. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. The other thing that I would definitely recommend checking out is the DNAging premium that we offer, because this is really interesting. So it's measuring these things called CPG islands, which is where a lot of this methylation is actually taking place. We have the ability now to look at the actual on-off switch, and you can tell which genes are on average being expressed and which genes are on average being silenced and methylated. So there's a lot of trickle down effect to how your body actually ages, right? So the people that are on here to talk about longevity, the DNAging is very interesting because it is measuring those on off switches in real time. And it's giving you a DNA methylation estimate even of different plasma based biomarkers. So by looking at DNA methylation, you can actually get a really accurate look at traditional stuff like CRP, HbA1c, fasting glucose. I mean, your DNA methylation can actually give you that same marker as if you tested it directly in the serum. So it's very fascinating. And the way that we look at this is that your genes are hardware, right? We know that you can't change those. You have to just sort of manage them, right? And live with them. So they're hardware, they're static, they can't change. Your DNA 360 is not going to need to be done again unless we add a bunch more genes, because that's the genotype you landed with. And that's ultimately what you have to work with. But how it's being expressed and how we measure that is with the DNAging technology. And we look at the CPG islands, and it actually tests them 950,000 times. So it's giving you a really good look at what is on average being turned on, what is on average being turned off. And your epigenetics are the software on top of the hardware. So it's dynamic. It's something that can change, and you can actually measure it in real time. The DNAging premium, it uses AI to actually sort of zoom out and extrapolate and estimate what your actual rate of aging is as well. So if you're aging at an accelerated rate, meaning anything more than 1 year per calendar year, even if it's 1.01, there's a lot of correlation to that and accelerated likelihood of diseases, right? You want to be aging at less than 1 year per calendar year. Even if it's 0.99, that directly reduces the likelihood of all cause mortality, right? Like all of these different diseases. Your literal rate of aging is something that can be estimated now by looking at DNA methylation. Our premium, by the way, does more than that. So it's called the Dunedin pace, where it's actually showing you like your rate of aging. Is it 1.25 per calendar year? Okay, we need to make sure that we add some interventions to help reduce that. Then it's got other reports that are looking at individual facets of aging. So it's taking DNA methylation and it's actually extrapolating it to look at your lung age versus your circulatory system age versus your brain age versus your skeletal system age. It's giving you 11 different organ systems, and it's giving you sort of the rate of aging of each one. So this is pretty implicit in how we would intervene on that, right? If I can see that your brain is aging faster than your circulatory system, well, now we know that little bit more about what we need to target, right? We don't want your brain accelerated aging. We want to make it so that it's going to be healthy into old age, right? So it actually gives you that as well. So the DNAging premium, it gives you a whole bunch of different metrics based on how your DNA is methylating moment by moment, and it's real-time measurement. So it's pretty accurate and actually gives you a pretty good snapshot of how your body is methylating and how it's aging because of how you're methylating. Fascinating stuff.
Very fascinating stuff. And that's where you can actually see that, the genetics that we come in with are more about what is a possibility or a susceptibility as opposed to destiny, right? Because all of the genes in the DNA 360 are things that we consider actionable by lifestyle intervention. And we do this to empower people. We don't want you to think, oh, I have, a suboptimal MTHFR, I'm a mutant, there's something wrong with me. That's not the way that we're looking at it. We're looking at you as a whole, and all of the different pieces and how they fit together and what things can be done by you to be empowered in your own life to be as healthy as you can and live as long as you can.
Yeah, and I should mention too that right now we do have a 10% off code for listeners to the webinar. It's DN Aging Plus, and you can get 10% off the DN Aging Premium if you so choose. And it's just a really good complement to the DNA 360 as well, because there's connective tissue, right? Like let's say we look at the DNA 360 and we can identify suboptimal genes and areas within that, including in your methylation cascade. Then you can kind of see how it's showing up in your body, right? Based on how your genes are actually methylating. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch that gives you a lot better screenshot of like methylation, aging, and how your genes are also impacting your rate of aging, right? So there's a lot of fun conversation that we as practitioners get to have surrounding that. And then you can know what to do about it as well, right? And the cool thing about age testing, I would say, is that you can redo it and then you can see like the literal number, like okay, now I'm literally aging slower than I was before. I added all these great interventions to help support my biology. So it gives you that ongoing measurement. There's actually a thing called the Aging Olympics, right? And it's like it's led by Brian Johnson, which he's an interesting character. I have mixed thoughts about some of his protocols. Um, but I admire the dedication, and he's trying to be the individual on Earth who is aging at the slowest possible rate. So if you guys want to do the aging Olympics, you can do that as well and see how slow you can possibly get that number.
Which can be a fun way to kind of interact with the community and to think of it in more of a light way, right? It's more of a game, gamifying longevity protocols. So, Justin, um, what are some things, without giving people specific advice because we don't have their genes in front of us, that we like to do? So every day, people are saying to us, I have these four gene things. Um, what should I do about it? And we always say, we really need to look at the whole thing. But then once we have, what are some of the kinds of interventions that you use a lot with the patients that you're working with?
It's a full-blown audit. Like you kind of go through and audit different facets of their lifestyle and just try to adjust and kind of put it in alignment with their genes. Whether we like it or not, like you're in alignment with an outcome one way or another, for better or worse. Don't think you're not. You're in alignment with an outcome. What do I always say? I say we have to get your energy, thoughts, and actions in alignment with the outcome you want. You want longevity. You want to be disease free. Well, we need to make sure that we're getting our energy, thoughts, and actions in alignment with that result right there. So I'll go through and I'll sort of identify suboptimal areas in the genes. And then we do something really important called clinical correlation, right? So we need to look and see, okay, what elements of this person's lifestyle are in fact out of alignment with their genes. And therefore, it's going to make it so that your body doesn't function as well. Like I mentioned earlier, every cell in your body has the full genome in it. It's just these epigenetic regulation channels that give the cell its identity. So it's an alignment process. I always start with making sure that your body has the right dietary input, right? And we have a whole profile about how that goes. Getting your macronutrients right, getting the things that are going to really metabolize properly, cellular metabolism, I'm talking about, getting that right is huge. The detoxification processes are another thing. I'm finding more and more that I need to add in more advanced detox strategies for people, right? Because we've introduced so many different toxins and things. It's like one of my first sessions with people now, I'm asking them about air filters, right, in their house. I'm asking them about water filters. I'm asking them, like, do you have sauna? Do you have a fasting protocol? Something that can help your cells to sort of divide more effectively and get rid of some of these things that we're taking in. Every toxin in the environment represents an epigenetic input that's going to impact your cells one way or another, right? So to me, it's a full-blown auditing process. And when it comes to the methylation cycle, I think things like mold are really important to talk about there because mold will absolutely disrupt the methylation cycle. Any toxic inputs like that, right? Like people who smoke or vape or whatever it is, that's directly changing your gene expression, just so you guys know. We need to swap out suboptimal habits and we need to build ourselves new habits that are going to impact our genes properly. So I go through their kitchen, right? I'm like, all right, how many seed oils are in your cupboard right now? Be honest, right? How many snacks, how many this, that, the other thing. And we just walk through sleep, detox, macronutrients, micronutrients. We talk about each section of the DNA 360, and then we make little adjustments, things that can kind of make it so your cells work that little bit better. I think sleep is huge for gene expression. I think that if you're not sleeping properly, you end up with cortisol dominance, and that compromises the gut. And then the gut compromises the hormones. And everything, like I mentioned earlier, is a cascade, right? So no one element here doesn't matter as far as how your body actually interprets things. And your epigenetics will ultimately inform how your cells behave day by day. What about you? Is there any like specific tactics that you do, like, oh, leafy greens or supplement with this, or what's your go-tos?
I mean, definitely leafy greens. I mean, you can't the fiber, the nutrients, everything is wonderful. But one of the things that I think people are frequently surprised that I like to do is either reduce altogether or rotate their supplements. Because I think there are so many supplements out there and they're so good at advertising, but not everybody needs every supplement. And sometimes, our bodies have to have certain things that happen, like a certain amount of stress is good for the body. So you don't want to completely suppress that. And a certain amount of inflammation is required in order for muscle growth and certain kinds of healing and things like that. And so I tend to go through people's supplements with them and, like I said, either take them off of a bunch of them or say, okay, take this one this week and this one this week and kind of rotate them through, because your body will stop responding to certain things that are little stressors as what they are supposed to do. So sometimes something comes into the body and it actually acts as a stressor that then promotes that instigates the body to do something healthy in response, and that response can be dulled if you just keep doing it, constantly. So it's not true with everything. Some things people take all the time, but I just wanted to bring that up because I think it can be really easy. People have brought in like 2 shopping bags of supplements into my office when I was still practicing in person that I had to kind of go through. And sometimes they were taking more than one supplement that had the same ingredient in it and not realizing that they were doubling or tripling up on things. And that was why they weren't feeling great.
Yeah, I think that's especially true with B vitamins, right? Like I encourage everyone on this call to go through your cabinet and see how many of these things have like added B vitamins. They're usually methylated when they are in those forms, because they'll add it in, right, as like another agent in the supplement. And you can be taking 3, 4 different supplements that have like a methylcobalamin in there. Then when you extrapolate and look at your methylation genes, it's pretty easy to see that you can overdo it there usually. So definitely go through and do a full audit on your supplements. I really recommend that. Start looking at everything as epigenetic inputs. That's my recommendation. Like I just had this conversation with a client yesterday about friggin' doom scrolling on social media. I said, like, you need to recognize one thing here. Your brain does not know the difference between a threat and a perceived threat. It has no mechanism by which it can differentiate those two, because our ancestors, the threats were all kind of right there. They didn't have access to what was going on across the world the way we do. So there's a few things going on with that, and it can impact the way your gene expression happens day by day. You're taking in information that is negative and is causing the limbic system to create that stress response with the HPA axis. So you're impacting your body in that way. You're kicking on the HPA axis in the fight or flight response. But then the other thing that you're doing is you're causing an adjustment in the dopaminergic system as well, right? So we have a whole profile about dopamine. We talk a lot about dopamine, and social media, that rapid fire thing about it, it causes a spike. It's not really a spike, but it causes your body to release the dopamine. And what happens is after you get a spike of dopamine, it actually will adjust to below the baseline to the same height in which it elevated, right? So the more it elevated, the more below that threshold it's going to end up later. And the threshold itself starts to lower and lower. And before you know it, you lack energy, you lack motivation because you've kicked on the dopamine response over and over again. Social media impacts your gene expression because you're taking in information that you're not able to process. It's really rapid fire, and like 90% of it is stressful and negative, right? It's talking about politics, and you're sitting there reading stuff with people you don't agree with. You're not with them in the same room. You're just kind of looking at what they said in black and white, and it's causing this HPA axis to be kicked off. So there's so much in our environment now that is just unnatural that our ancestors didn't deal with. And I believe it's causing gene expression to be suboptimal. It's changing it moment by moment. Remember what I said, that the methylation cycle happens thousands of times per second. Every second that you spend giving your body the wrong input is impacting how your body is methylating your genes. And that's just a fact. There's been some great work done showing that even just negative thoughts impacts like 4,200 different gene expressions in that moment, right? So the way you talk to yourself is very much relevant. I'm reminded of, you remember that research that was done in Japan years back about water? And it was like you put loving words like "you're beautiful" and all this in with the water, and then you put like "I hate you" as words in the other place of water, and it changes the structure of the water. The implications of that are insane if you actually think about that. And considering we're made at a 70% water, the way that you think, I believe, is absolutely an input that is impacting how your body methylates its genes. I mean, moment by moment, your body's reacting to stuff, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I haven't thought about that study in a while, but it's there was a whole book and it was really kind of beautiful. Um, I think that sometimes people think that because B vitamins specifically are water soluble, that it doesn't matter how much of them they take, as opposed to vitamin D, which they know if they get up past a certain threshold, you want it to be high enough, but you don't want it to be too high because it's fat soluble. So they get it
Yeah.
tested. But there can actually be negative consequences, even though they're water soluble. And one of the first one that I learned about was B6 with nerve pain. That if you're dosed too high, it can cause nerve pain. But it turns out that that's also true of some of these methylated vitamins. Also can cause nerve pain and uh, mess up the oxidative stress balance. So, these are things that we don't want to have happen in our bodies. So, making sure like just Justin was saying, go through your medicine cabinet and make sure that you're not inadvertently making yourself feel poorly and then looking for the next supplement to fix it. One of the things that I really appreciate about the supplements that we do here at the DNA company are, the ones that are already put together that are not custom made are put together really carefully so that they're not going to push people too far in a direction. They're really made with care. And then we also have a completely customizable black label line where you can meet with someone, likely Justin himself, to help you put together a supplement that's just for you, that has the right amounts of things, that's looking at all of your genes and seeing what's actually best for you. And then you're just taking one set of something. And maybe there are a couple of things because we don't have access to absolutely everything, and we do such good quality control that we source things really well. So I really appreciate that about the company, which is that there's a solution that's just as customized as the genetic testing that we provide.
Yeah, it's. I was thinking about this the other day about health problems, and we use the word holistic because like we try to address all the different systems of the body. And what's interesting is disease is holistic because it impacts every system in the body as well, right? So if the problem is holistic, then the solution has to be holistic as well. And with our supplements, I mean, granted, to Dr. Steady's point, like not everything can be compounded, and you can't necessarily put everything all in one because, for example, vitamin D, we have a different dosing protocol based on your genes, so I can't compound that with a bunch of other stuff necessarily. Or fish oils, right? You can't compound a fat like a fatty acid. So certain things you would still take on the side. But the black label program is really there to manage gene expression to the best of our ability. And it takes into account things that have competing elements within the cell, as well as like contraindications from one supplement to another or a supplement to a medication. So all of that gets taken into account where there's like you do a full intake and all these things, and you would meet with me And we go over it, and we work with compounding pharmacies to give you the best case scenario there. And that's important because that way you're not running the risk of overmethylating within your stack. I'll share this too. Folic acid is another animal here too, because it's used to fortify so many things. Like when you buy any, like especially processed stuff that you probably shouldn't be eating anyways. But when you look on the other ingredients, you're going to find folic acid listed over and over again in all these pastas and different things. And it's pretty risky because there is absolutely a toxicity limit to folic acid, right? So that's another issue with people who eat a lot of processed foods, is that they're really overdoing it on that form of B9. And it may not align with the genes in the first place, but folic acid has a toxicity associated with a certain milligram dosage, and it doesn't tell you how much is in those foods. It says it's in there. It doesn't say how much is in there. So if that's a regular part of your diet, you can be oversaturating your cells with folic acid and totally overdoing it with B9. And that's something I recommend being very cautious about. So that's another recommendation, everyone on this call. Go through your cabinet and see, is there folic acid listed in this carbohydrate? Because that's going to make it so that you can easily overmethylate, and it can be a really big problem.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons that some of these things were fortified in the first place was because they realized that especially pregnant women needed folate to prevent neural tube defects, right? But the form wasn't taken into consideration. How much people were consuming wasn't taken into consideration. And so once again, it's like the too much of a good thing, not the right type of a good thing for certain people presents a problem. And when I'm thinking about just looking at MTHFR and not looking at SHMT1, FUT2, MTR, COMT, all of these things, it would be sort of like if someone met you and they only saw you at your worst moment, right? And it didn't take into consideration your best moments and your in between moments and things like that. You know how we're all a little bit different with different people? Like, my brothers revert. They come up behind me and they'll tap me on one shoulder and run to the other side. They've been doing this since they were little and they still do it. And now they're changing it up because now I look over this shoulder and they run to the other side. So I can't win. But you wouldn't want them at work to have someone see them at work and have that be their only experience of them. Right. So, and not that that's a bad thing, but it's just kind of silly. Right. And they want to be respected at work, not to be seen as silly. So, so don't just take one gene and have that and build your identity on it, I guess, right? That one gene is definitely not your identity. And even all of them aren't your identity because they can all be affected by various things. But self-knowledge is really empowering. And so when we look at all of them together, which is not how a lot of practitioners, quite frankly, look at them, we're able to see more of the picture of you and not just pigeonhole you into one role or one gene. So that's my
I
little
love that.
speech.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it reminds me of Bruce Lee had a great quote. He said, ultimately, all knowledge is self-knowledge. I love that. And I think that that applies to what we do, because it's like we have knowledge of genes, but then as practitioners, we also have to have knowledge of people. And we need to be able to like have that connection with people and really relay scientific information and how it applies to you, the individual. And that's the realm that we're entering now in this industry. Um, so there's like a 3-stage approach as well to how ultimately you need to do this and manage your methylation. So there's 3 steps, and the first one would be identify, right? So that means getting your genetic testing done. I can't really recommend doing one that only looks at MTHFR based on all that we talked about, and that's become a thing. It's like, oh, get your MTHFR tested. I think we've hashed out enough that is, while very important, it's just not the whole picture. We want to get a full concrete look at your methylation cascade. So step 1 is identify, understand your genetics, and then understand lab markers, right? Homocysteine, folate, B12, those kinds of things. Then the second step is under your control. It's what epigenetics are we giving it? So that's the adjustment phase. diet and stress and toxins and supplements, all of these different things represent that input, including how you think. And that's how we adjust our epigenetics. Then it's all about optimizing. You can track and you can test it with things like the DNA gene. Methylation, the cycle itself is static, but what we do with it is absolutely dynamic and it's up to us. So identify, adjust, and then keep track with things like the DNA aging and the different tools that we have. The better input is going to give you the best output, right? So use your genes and all the knowledge that we're able to give you here. I really recommend you guys look at all of the methylation webinars we've done, because I personally have done probably like 6 at this point. I don't even know, but there's a lot of great info here, and just have that DNA 360 handy and just think about what we're saying, look at your genes, and then apply it to what we're doing. If you guys need more of a hand, then I would say by all means, you can get sessions with myself or Dr. Tracy. It takes an hour. I mean, you're going to need to properly hash these kinds of things out. But if you're really confused about how this topic goes, then by all means, sign up. You can get a session just personal, you and I, or you and Dr. Tracy, and we can go over your cascade and correlate it to you and your lifestyle. We never just look at the genes and say, here you go, right? Everything gets correlated to your life experience up till now. I always say you lived yourself into this situation, and we're going to live you right back out of it. But we're not going to do it with a blindfold on, right? We're going to make sure that we know. We are going to transition into Q&A, but do you have anything to wrap up with before we do that, Dr. Tracy?
I don't think so. I think my last thing was sort of my how I wanted to kind of seal it up.
Right, the grand finale.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that being said, let's dive in. We got a handful of questions here. And by the way, any question that is relative to, like, I have MTR this and MTHFR that, we're not going to be fielding those kinds of questions because, like I just said, in the absence of clinical correlation and understanding your full profile, we don't have the capacity on this platform to give you a really robust answer. And the last thing that we want to do is give you the wrong advice. I'd rather give you none than what's wrong. So anything like that, just by all means, direct it to the chat, and we will absolutely set up a session for you guys, and we can dive into it nice and deep then. Okay, so let's dive in. Christina asked a question. In response to poll number 5, other, I'd like to understand how MTHFR is viewed by most doctors and how the DNA 360 views it differently. My amazing listening to Curious Doctor asked me recently if I had MTHFR tested, and it made me curious how med students and things are taught about it versus how the DNA 360 and the DNA puzzle would view it. So, I mean, I think the answer to that is effectively what we went over as far as, like, MTHFR, very important, right? But there is 2 SNPs. Both of them have a little bit of a difference to it. One has more implication with homocysteine and vascular issues. One has more implication with kind of neurocognitive things like serotonin, dopamine, etc. And we look at that as part of one whole cycle that's going on thousands of times per second. So that's one runner in the analogy. That runner could be slow or drop the baton, and the rest of the runners may still be able to get past the finish line. And we're looking at the efficiency of it. MTHFR, I believe, was really the first gene to be identified in the methylation cycle, probably a decade ago. And that's, I think, why it got so much publicity as well. So that's why there's kind of this zooming in effect that you see with a lot of MDs. At least they're talking about it. Hey, that's a step forward. We're talking about genes now in a lot of different circles, and that's fantastic. But the DNA company understands, like, okay, there is more than one moving part to this, and we cannot zoom in on one gene with anything in the DNA 360. Each one is a job that needs to be done, and we need to pay homage to each and every job, and that's how we get past the finish line. So hopefully that helps. The second question is coming from Kelsey. She says, I'd love to know if there are different symptoms for different methylation genes when they are read, like MTHFR, COMT, MTRR. You have an opinion on that one, Dr. Tracy?
We went over some of the things, right? So there can be fatigue and sluggishness and maybe some brain fog and things like that, or signs of inflammation in the body, but not necessarily. And sometimes people are completely asymptomatic despite having, red in all of those genes because of how they're living. And so it really, but the difference in um, someone being undermethylated, where you see more of the fatigue side, versus over or hypermethylated, where it's more a little bit of agitation, anxiety, things like that. If you can kind of group them into, am I tired or am I weirdly wired? That would be a good way to think about it, I think. Anything to add, Justin?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. And it's, again, those are only three out of the whole cascade that we look at as well, right? So it's like these can really have pretty varied symptomology associated with it because we're talking about gene expression and we're talking about the whole genome being expressed. The analogy of the light bulbs being turned on or off. If you're standing in a room and you need the light switch turned on, but it stays turned off, that's going to impact what you're able to do in that room, right? So I think that there's a lot of trickle down effect in the methylation cycle, and it's tough to identify what symptom is going to come because of what suboptimal variant there. So that's why we try to just look at the efficiency of the whole thing and substitute where necessary with the most key forms of the B vitamins. Then the rest of it's lifestyle, keeping the mold out, etc. So that's how we do that.
And it's a relationship, not
Yeah.
just not just something alone.
Okay. So James has a question. If someone has optimal methylation profile, would methylated B12 and methylfolate cause overmethylation? Oops, sorry, the answer moved on me there. If homocysteine is not going below 5, is everything doing good? So this would be the form of question that I would say a session is likely in your interest. But in brief, what I would say is that the two main ones that you want to look at would be SHMT1. If that one is suboptimal, then you may require folinic acid instead of the methylfolate. And then the MTR variants are what you want to look at with regard to if you need the methyl group with the B12 or not. But don't forget about that FUT2 gene as well, because if that's suboptimal, normal methylfolate or cobalamin or adenosyl cobalamin, neither one's going to absorb well if FUT2 function is not optimal. So those are the two I would point you towards. It's MTR and SHMT1. Then consider that FUT2 gene as well. But I love that you're keeping an eye on homocysteine, and that's one of the main, as I would say, plasma markers to have a look at and keep an eye on with regard to the efficiency of the cycle. Madeline says, oh, it moved. Can you explain what B vitamin sensitivity has to do with methylation? You want to tackle that one?
Well, I can definitely see how methylation could play into it, because if you're taking the suboptimal form for your particular genetics, then you can be very sensitive to vitamin B, various types of vitamin B. So if you don't need methylation, but you're doing methylation, or you need methylation and you're not, which is complicated because it involves multiple genes, then you could definitely have a response to it that is not ideal.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying with my sister having the panic attacks, right? I mean, you could just really refer to that in simple terms as B vitamin sensitivity. She took it and it caused this. The real reason why was because of the addition of too many methyl groups, but I mean, you could kind of just call it a sensitivity to that particular form and format. So that's what it is. I mean, usually the response is pretty visceral as well. Like you kind of notice it. It's like the heart rate will elevate and you get sort of those overmethylating symptoms almost right away with it. So B vitamin sensitivity is pretty common, but I believe it's because of how it interacts with the methylation cycle. Yeah. Okay, so Marianne is asking, and this is in response to what you were discussing there, Dr. Tracy, with regard to histamine response. And she's just asking if you can kind of elaborate on that a little bit or reiterate how histamine response is impacted with methylation.
Well, from the research that I've done, it can you can have too much of a histamine response in response to either one, depending on how low in methyl groups you are or how high, if you're overmethylated. So your immune system is impacted by methylation. And so if you think about histamine response as part of your immune system, that's why people who have seasonal allergies, something's coming in that their body is recognizing as something foreign that they don't like, and they have this inflammatory response to it. Sometimes people can have way to an overabundance of histamine reaction. Part of that can also be about toxicity and the body having way too much inflammation in general and being hyper responsive to the least little thing, something that didn't really bother them before. They can get to a place where suddenly everything is bothering them. So I would say that it's not as simple as saying if you're having a severe histamine response that it's definitely one or the other, because there's a case to be made for either one being the cause or neither. So it's complicated.
Yeah, well, and there's a few moving parts to histamine as well, right? Like as far as the presence of the DAO enzyme, which is there to break down histamine. Sometimes if you have like a later stage mucosal barrier injury, I've seen that before, where someone has leaky gut basically, and it's causing less DAO enzyme to be released. So you're not kind of moderating histamine levels properly. And another thing there too is just cortisol dominance, right? If when you get that stress response and your body releases cortisol, one of the things that it does in the gut is it sort of stimulates the mast cells, right? And mast cells will release these pro-inflammatory cytokines, and things like histamine are there, things like tumor necrosis factor alpha, things like interleukins, particularly interleukin 6. All those things can get created in the gut based on the cortisol load, right? So you got to consider cortisol, you've got to consider the diamine oxidase enzyme, and then methylation as well. All of those things together are friggin' relevant for histamine levels. So just make sure that you're looking at all of the above and not just focusing too much on methylation with that. Mike has a question about lab markers. So basically saying that, with methylation, homocysteine is the main thing that he's been paying attention to. What are some others? So like we talked about, I recommend serum B12. Serum folate can be another thing to look at. I would consider the DNAging premium to be a lab. I mean, honestly, that's what it is. It's a lab, and it's going to show you probably the most accurate look at how your body is actually methylating things. So that would be my list. I would say a DNAging premium, then homocysteine, as well as B12 and B9 in the serum. That's probably your best bets there. But definitely keep an eye on that homocysteine, because that's going to be the most sort of direct marker of the inflammation being caused by suboptimal methylation. Okay, so Lisa is asking about homocysteine as well. She's saying, what is an acceptable level? So I'm guessing you mean like, what is the acceptable serum level in the blood? When you get really crazy, it's like over 100. That's considered like severely elevated. In the middle would be less than 100, but more than like 30, right? So if it's in there, if it's 50, if it's 70, that's kind of in the middle, but moderately elevated and something that you may want to pay attention to. Normal is pretty low. It's, 5, 10, 15. It's not going to be highly elevated. And if it is above that, then that's a good marker to keep your eye on with regard to methylation. Any other kind of notes on that, Dr. Tracy?
Nope, I think you covered that perfectly.
Cool. So Amy has another question about homocysteine. So we're talking a lot about that right now. High homocysteine can signal poor methylation. How can we evaluate for high or over methylation? So it'd be the same thing, I would say, keeping an eye on the homocysteine levels, and then also the DNAging would be another marker to look at there, because it's like I mentioned, it's literally measuring the on-off switches, right? So it's telling you, like, are all of these genes being turned on, or is it sort of a mix? Then it's extrapolating it with the AI technology to kind of show you what the actual impacts of that are, as far as C-reactor protein and the different things that we talk about. So I don't think you're going to find a better measurement of real methylation than using that technology. It's measuring the CpG sites 950,000 times, and it's giving you on average what is being methylated and what is not being methylated. This one is directed at you. You want to cover the one
Yes,
from
I've
Mary?
got it. So Mary is wondering that why the MTHFR variants are shown differently than how I spoke about them. I spoke about them that way because it was shorter, but they are the same thing. So the one that says RS 1801133 is the one that I said was C677. And the one that says RS 1801131 is the one that I said was A1298. So they are the same genes. There are multiple names and multiple numbers, and sometimes I take the shortcut of using the shorter number. So that's the short answer.
Okay, and what is next? So Lewis is asking, my MCV is always high, but homocysteine is always normal. Is this an indication of poor methylation?
So I want to say that that this can be a B12 thing. I would get your B12 checked also, but once again, I can't recommend anything or diagnose anything over here, but just that would be something that I would get checked out in addition to these two tests, because I have seen that lab value change if vitamin B12 was not being absorbed or utilized well in the body. So,
Right.
anything to add, Justin?
No, but I will say that, again, it's tough to know how poor methylation is going to truly manifest in the body, right? So it's not that it isn't methylation. Methylation is going to have a role in pretty much all health markers going on there. Getting it right will help to correct a lot of things downstream, but the details of that are a little bit tough to pinpoint until you actually do it. Right? When you get the methylation cycle right, you use things like de-aging to kind of moderate it and see how it's working in the body. I think the combination of all these things, it can really equalize a lot of these problems, but what's causing what can be a little bit difficult without a real deep dive investigation into it. Okay, so Christina is asking, she says, I didn't realize that SAMe was a part of the methylation cycle. So can you speak a bit to which gene variants that she needs to be aware of when taking SAMe and if it can cause overmethylation? Overmethylation definitely can happen with SAMe because it's pretty much what we call a universal donor of methyl groups. I'm blanking a little bit as to which gene in particular would be implicit there. Do you remember which one?
Uh, let me think. I know that this is somewhere in my notes.
Because it's when you want a direct boost in methyl donors, basically, right? So it's like if
Yeah.
you're under methylating, it's likely not going to be just one gene. It's going to be kind of the whole cycle. If you are overall suboptimal and not methylating properly, then adding SAMe because it directly donates methyl groups. I would say that that's where it's useful as opposed to just one gene or another. But like I mentioned, I mean, you want to pay attention to things like COMT, right? If you have a slow COMT, you want to be aware of adding too many methyl groups that the COMT enzyme won't be able to process properly, because that pushes you into overmethylation pretty quick. So COMT is definitely a relevant mover there, but I'm not certain as to exactly which one gene other than that would be implicit.
Yep. Now I've lost the questions.
We could come back to that one if you like, if it dawns on you, but definitely COMT. I would say that's one to look at there, Christina. So in the meantime, I will answer Candace's question. So she says, what about using like a liquid adenosyl B12? It depends on if it's intended as a sublingual supplement or if it's just liquid format because you can't swallow capsules properly. If it is one that is meant to be kind of swashed around in the mouth and get into those little nodes underneath of your tongue, that's what puts it directly into the bloodstream, and it's effectively a sublingual format of the adeno. Bear in mind, you need to understand the MTR gene because you may not need the adeno. You may do better with the methyl group added based on your MTR gene. So I'm usually a fan of liquid vitamins, honestly, but it's like, is it meant to be sublingual or not? You can look at your FUT2 gene, and if that's optimal, you don't really need it in that format. If it's suboptimal, then you do. And then look at MTR, and then you can extrapolate if you need the adenosyl version or if you need the methylated version, being methylcobalamin, methyl B12. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so Madeline is asking about if your methylation profile changes during your lifetime. So once again, we have two different conversations here. We've got the methylation cycle, and the methylation cycle, the genes associated with it are absolutely stagnant, right? So the SNPs that you have for MTHFR or SHMT1, those are absolutely stagnant, and that would represent what I called the hardware earlier in the call. But the rest of it, the epigenetics, that is absolutely dynamic, and that's something that will change over a lifetime. And it's a moving target, right? So your body is methylating different things at different rates, and that's where keeping an eye on it is definitely in your interest because that part is under your control and it is dynamic as well. Susan's got several questions here. I'm just seeing if I can sort of combine them at all. So what gene pattern would you look at if serum B12 is high, but it is suspected that B12 is not being absorbed well? So for that, I mean, I would look at the FUT2 gene as well, right? Because that's going to be implicit as far as absorption of the B12 that you're taking in. I would dabble in doing the sublingual formats as well as the normal ones if you suspect that it's not absorbing well, because then you can keep an eye on it and see if it's just building up in the bloodstream and not getting into the cells. That can actually also signify that you're not getting proper absorption there, right? So if it's abnormally high and you're on just a normal dose of B12, that might signify that you're not getting proper dosages there. So that way you would want to use like a different format of the vitamins. But there's the genes associated with that are just the MTR, MTRR, and FUT2. And those are the ones to keep your eye on with that in particular. So yeah, she's asking also about the MTHFR SNPs. Those are the ones that Dr. Tracy went over. And then MTR and FUT2. Let me just look up what the actual variants are so that we don't misspeak on these.
I've got it.
Oh, you got it? I was about
No,
to
go
say
ahead.
it.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So for MTR, the G allele is suboptimal and the A allele is optimal. The MTRR, the G is suboptimal and the A is optimal. And then for MTHFR, for the 1133 SNP, the T is suboptimal and the C is optimal. But remember, there's two SNPs there. So for the 1131, the A is efficient and the C is inefficient. And this is the most complicated part of what we do, trying to remember the SNPs.
100%. It's a lot to memorize.
Yeah, that's the only part that we never memorize. We have our notes on hand all the time.
Yep.
Okay, so Ginger is asking, does elevated B12 serum levels typically of or is it representative of a gene variation? This is without taking B12 supplementation. I haven't taken a DNA test, but interested. So I would offer pretty much the same answer as the one before from Susan there, that you want to play with it as far as what your FUT2 gene is looking like, as well as your MTR and MTRR. I highly recommend that you get your DNA 360 done because that's really what's going to guide that. It's a bit difficult to give proper guidance if we don't know what your genes look like in that one. You want to answer Mary's question about the leafy greens?
Sure. Mary says green leafy is a main recommendation, but the FUT GG makes that a rabbit hole. Not fun being a vegan with a messed up gut, and that is not the health outcome wanted. So there are definitely things that can be done. You can be vegan. You can have that presentation of FUT, and still have the health outcomes that you want. It's just about, at least you know that, right? So that knowledge is power. And if you need guidance around what things you need to do or not do in order to have the health outcome that you want, that we are definitely happy to help you with that. But I do think it's important to just remember that knowing this isn't supposed to be a bummer. It's supposed to feel empowering, like, okay, I have this information. There are things that I can do. I can take action steps to make sure that I'm as healthy as possible.
Absolutely. And then the other thing I would say too is when it comes to leafy greens, I never shut up about food sensitivity screening as well, because we don't want to take a step forward and another one back. So I always recommend having a food sensitivity screening, even once a year or something like that, to see, because you can cause inflammation in the gut by taking the wrong form of leafy green as well. Some people are sensitive to spinach and not kale, or arugula and not romaine, or whatever it is. So that really dials it in that much further as far as like which one is going to really work the best for you. So I recommend doing that. Um, Susan is asking another question about the symptoms of taking too much methylfolate or other forms of B9. So these would be symptoms of overmethylating. So everything from anxiety, right, agitation, irritability, mood swings. I'll tell you a really common one would actually be insomnia. That's I've seen that over and over again clinically. People that really overdo methylfolate and then they have sleeping problems. And that's just because they're kicking the methylation cycle into overdrive. So it's like overstimulation, it's the racing thoughts, it's the insomnia. It can also cause like gut upset in other people as well, headaches, even like muscle pain, joint pain, all of those things can be implicit there. So I would say one of the most common would be the insomnia. I think that's the one that I've seen probably the most. What do you think about that, Dr. Tracy? Like insomnia probably in your top list there?
Definitely insomnia, and then that sort of jitteriness that someone isn't used to. Yeah.
Yeah.
The anxiety, jitteriness. Yep.
Yeah, totally common. So those would be the main ones to keep your eyes on there. And remember that folic acid is everywhere, right? So if you're supplementing B9 on top of taking in a lot of folic acid without realizing it, that's going to push you into overdrive. Okay, and we are on to the last question from Sandra. She says, I lost 20 pounds since last year with unknown cause. Could methylation be a culprit? Interesting. So I would say it could be a indirect culprit because metabolism has direct connective tissue to methylation and how that all works. There isn't one thing that methylation doesn't do in the body, right? Because we're talking about gene expression. Even just the inflammation piece really plays a role in weight gain or weight loss, right? So I think that methylation is going to have some trickle down effect. What I would suggest is making sure that you have your macronutrient genes on hand, looking at things like TCF7L2 to understand your insulin response as well is going to really matter. Um, there's a lot of things when we lose weight really quickly and we don't know why. There's a lot of different reasons why that can happen in the body. I mean, sometimes it's just losing muscle mass, right? Sarcopenia, from not having enough amino acids or having poor protein digestion, right? So keeping an eye on markers like indican to have an understanding of how your gut is processing protein, that matters. Leaky gut, that can cause that as well because you're literally not digesting nutrients properly. Gut dysbiosis can cause that. Poor sleep can cause that because the cortisol will eat away at your muscle mass and you end up losing weight. So I would recommend a coaching session for you, honestly, so that we can get an understanding of what else was going on there. But in brief, yeah, I mean, methylation affects absolutely everything. Do you have an opinion on that, Dr. City?
I think you really covered it well. Yeah.
Have a coaching session because that's how we're going to really know all of the above. And it's there's a lot of reasons for that, but I'm hoping it's stabilized for you and that you're where you need to be now. And with that said, I mean, we tackled it. So this is a friggin' difficult topic. In case you guys didn't realize, it's a textbook example of a cellular process that has a step by step by step thing going on, and there is huge implications to how your body actually heals itself, deals with inflammation, how you can get over illness, disease, things like COVID. I mean, if you're not methylating well, it's going to make it so that even that cytokine storm that happens from getting sick, it's going to be prolonged, it's going to be harder for you to get over illnesses and things as well. So methylation matters. And I think that most people zoom in way too far on just one gene. We choose to zoom out because there's a whole cycle going on. It's going on many times per second, and there's ways to support it. There's ways to make it worse, and we only control what we control. So make sure that you do exactly that. Use your DNA 360 to its fullest extent, because that gives you the best epigenetic ideas. And I hope you guys learned something tonight. This is a good topic. It's one that we've covered before. It's one that we're going to cover again. And maybe put in the chat if you found this useful, or if it was just way too buzzwordy and Dr. Tracy and I were just using too many big words or not. Any kind of closing thoughts tonight, Dr. Tracy?
I just wanted to reiterate that one of the beautiful things about having these two different tests is that one gives you the basis and sort of the blueprint of what you came in with. And then the other one shows you what your lifestyle, things that you can control, is how those things are impacting you. And then that test you can do again. So you can, so that then you can be like, oh, I did this thing, and now I seem younger, and I can tell from this test that it's actually happening on a cellular level. And that feels really good. And if suddenly as we age, quite frankly, so do the things that we need to do in the ways that we need to do them. The exercise that may have been perfect for us at age 18 may not be the perfect age for us at age 58. It might be, but it might not be. And so having a test that can kind of age with you and show you where you might need to make some changes is also a really kind of a great thing. It's really taking kind of like a picture of you right then in that moment, so that you can look at yourself clearly and decide what you want to do about it.
Yeah, I love it. You can definitely keep track that way. And that's exactly what Dr. Tracy's talking about here. Like, you can know what your genes are, and then know the actual trickle down effect and how they're manifesting in the body. I'm seeing a lot of love in the comments. You guys are very welcome. And we will continue to tackle this until everybody gets the best understanding of it possible. And thank you so much for showing up tonight. We do these every week. We do them for you. And we're so happy to be able to come here and just drop some high quality information. So if you guys remain interested, we'll stay here, and we will continue to do our very best at explaining some extremely complicated topics. And I personally will be back tomorrow. I don't think you're on with me tomorrow, are you, Dr. Tracy?
No, I'm not.
No? All right. Well, I will see you all tomorrow, and we will continue to do what we do. Thank you, Dr. Tracy. This was fantastic. And have a great night, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, Justin. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.